Today I'm going to talk about eyelids, placing eyelids and sewing eyelids to attach. So the eyelid piece that I usually use in my patterns is a little V shape, and to place an eyelid on an eye, I usually like to start at the back corner of the eye and then bring those 2 points of the V together at the front corner of the eye. Depending on how you position this can significantly affect the mood of your creature. So if you want them to be a little happier, you might want to position it so that the angle is of the back to the front is upward, and position it so that it's a little more serious. You might want it to make it straight across, and make it a little angrier or stern, you might want to position it downward. So with that back corner a little higher than the front corner. Now to pin that in place, I like to use these pearl-headed pins that are about 1.5 inches long. If I could get them longer, I would. This gives me enough purchase to be able to manipulate the pin, and I've just resigned myself to the fact that they will often bend, and I have to rebend them back to being straight when I start a new project. So I go in from one of the corners of the bottom of the V, and I anchor that in place where I want it. Then I stretch that top eyelid and I insert the pin through the tip of that V, and I stretch it and position it where I want it. Then I do the same to the bottom eyelid. I anchor that base part in place. I take a pin, I insert it through the tip of that V and the same point so that it comes together like an eyelid. Then if I'm having trouble seeing the eye and I'd like them to be a little further apart, I insert a pin through the side of the bottom or top of the eyelid, and I stretch that a little bit and position it how I want it to be so that it's a little bit more open. You can do that to the top as well. Insert the pin through the top part of the eyelid, stretch it a little bit, and position it so that it's a little bit more open. If you are unhappy with that placement, you can redo it. That's the beauty of the pins. So I think this is a little bit too open here. I see a little too much of the head. So I'm going to take these 2 pins out and position them a little bit closer to the eye. Then I'm going to stretch them a little bit further back behind the eye so that I really get that shape that I want. I'm going to redo this and redo the bottom one. And so now there's about an even amount of the white body showing through on this side of the eye and on the front corner of the eye. Actually a little bit more on this, so I'm going to stretch it one more time. I'm going to redo this pin, stretch that, and redo this pin, and stretch that. Now it looks even. And that's how I position an eyelid carefully, repeatedly, until I get it exactly the way I want it. And then I use the yarn tail from the eyelid to sew it in place. I use tiny whip stitches with a darning needle. I anchor it in place exactly where the pin is. And then I work through each of the stitches of the eyelid and do tiny whip stitches holding them in place exactly along the lines of where the pins are holding it. If the pin is in your way, you can take the pin out, particularly if you've just done the stitch right before it. So I can remove that one. Sometimes the pins catch on the yarn tail and it can tear like it just did. But that is the point. You use tiny whip stitches, you stitch it into place along both edges of the eyelid, exactly as you've pinned it in place. And that should work really well for you. I wanted to give a second example. The upcoming Fairy Cat Dragon eye has a new kind of eyelid that is attached on both ends. So in this one, you just kind of have to place it as you want it around the eye in whatever mood you want from your Fairy Cat Dragon, and then you pin it in place. Same concept. You start at the back, you put one pin into that top corner, and then you position that inside corner of the eye. And then you position another pin at the back lower corner of the eye. And now my eyelid is too much closed, so I want to open that up so that you can see this fancy safety eye. So I pin the bottom lid a little bit more open, and then I pin the top lid to be a little bit more open. And now it's exactly the way I want it. So then I take the yarn tail from the eyelid and I would sew little whip stitches along the bottom of the eye and then along the top of the eyelid. You don't need to sew anything on the inside of the eyelid. That should stay as it is. Just make sure that you particularly anchor all of those pins that you carefully placed that shape the eyelid to make it what you want it to be. I hope that helped.